is NBC Nightly News with David Brinkley in Washington and John Chancellor in New York.
Good evening. The Camp David Summit Conference.
Again, domestic. Al, what do you have?
Chicago, Norma will be at Elkhart again on the Pinto hearing. That'll come back to Chicago.
Is there going to be a decision on that soon?
Yeah.
Huh?
Should be a decision today. And chances are there will be indictments.
9 a.m., New York, the Nightly News headquarters. Executive producer Joe Angotti is briefed by other producers about what might be expected. Indictments in the Ford Pinto case could be the major story. But there may be a break in the peace talks at Camp David. Producer Bill Wheatley has been in touch with Washington.
We have Camp David, probably Judy Woodruff. They released more stills. They must have released about a dozen of them last night. Some of them were fairly good.
Or the story may be the Civil War in Nicaragua. Foreign producer Harry Griggs has been on top of it.
Our best bet is Nicaragua again today. Francis is out with the crew, and I don't expect to hear from him until 3. But if it's anything like what they've been bringing in the last few days, I think we should count on something. The fighting is still heavy.
The foreign and domestic bureaus of NBC News have offered nearly 24 film or tape stories for the program. Only 10 or 11 will make it. During the next 2 hours, new stories will be added to the list, others dropped. There is constant communications with producers and correspondents in the field. Satellites must be ordered. Copy from the Associated Press and United Press must be read. Mid-morning, John Chancellor in New York and David Brinkley in Washington are briefed by their producers. They ask for research and developments on certain stories.
Okay, Harry.
And invariably, a story changes. Harry Griggs has just heard from correspondent Fred Francis in Managua.
Fighting continues. The evacuation continues. He's also checking several other small towns where there's activity. The airport is absolutely jammed with people trying to get out of the country. So we'll have
The airport in Managua?
Right. Just absolutely crammed. We're out there shooting them.
Nearby, the videotape editing room. Producers and editors discuss changes in tonight's major investigative story about the Hells Angels. NBC News is the only network to devote 4 to 5 minutes each night to an investigative story. We call it Segment 3.
When you come to weather, there's about a second there before we pick up Ryan's narration.
No, because I think you need that. Okay. Because of the change on the audio. Yeah, I need that. We're almost 38, right?
There are 6 producers and 9 correspondents assigned to Segment 3. Brian Ross's report is the first of a 2-part investigation how the Hells Angels are moving into organized crime.
Hello, everybody. Burbank?
Here.
Chicago? Houston? Atlanta? Northeast?
Noon. Executive producer Joe Angotti, producers, editors, and show production personnel meet for a conference call with all the domestic bureaus. The bureaus report on the stories they are covering, as well as the stories they want to cover in the future. Some preliminary decisions can now be made. It is here that producers and editors tell the executive producer what stories they have for him to use on tonight's program. The conference call ends, and Joe Angotti gets more information on the Pinto indictments.
3 counts of reckless homicide, 1 count of criminal recklessness, and the deaths of 3 young women.
And no one from Ford was talking after the indictments came in.
The attorney walked right by the cameras. No comment.
But the top priority is the story that probably will lead tonight's program. That is the Camp David Summit. Joe Angotti needs the latest information on this story. He meets with his senior producer, Bill Wheatley, John Chancellor, and Washington producers Bob McFarlane and Jerry Solomon, who are on the conference call speaker.
McFarlane, why don't you give us a rundown on what you know about Camp David?
I don't know an awful lot. The White House just called to say that for our guidance only, the summit would end tomorrow. That's all they said. No time, nothing else.
When you say for your guidance only, is that off the record, or can we report that?
That is off the record, not for broadcast.
Did they give you any idea of when briefings would be done, Bob? Any time, morning, afternoon?
Hopefully we will get some guidance on that a little later today, but as of the moment, we have nothing.
All right, I'm coming down in the morning, and I'm going to go right to your office.
Okay, fine.
I'll be in there about 9 o'clock in the morning.
We know that the White House is saying they're going to wrap up tomorrow and not be able to report that tonight.
I think we report it's expected to end tomorrow.
I mean,
I think you can allude to it, but I think if it is just guidance, you got to play by the
We can't say
rules.
the White House
No, I don't.
says it will end, but I think we can say it's expected to end fairly. I don't think that's a problem.
If they're saying that now, they may even have a schedule of briefings and things by the end of the day.
Also, if they're saying that now, it seems to me that they must have an agenda for the communique, and that there may be the possibility of leaks this afternoon on what's in there.
Well, what worries me is that I may get a call from Sadat or Begin saying, come on down tonight.
If that happens, you go.
If we don't get anything tomorrow, then I'll just stand by, and David will be in the studio, right?
Right.
Okay.
But the plan now is for you to be doing the interviews. Let's assume that we know for sure that tomorrow's the day. David will go out to Camp David and do the top of the show from there. John Hart will do the rest of the show from the
I
studio.
see. So that David can, okay.
We will plan on going right to Camp David tomorrow morning, Joe.
I think so, yes.
Is John Hart all lined up?
Yeah, he's here.
Okay.
He's been briefed.
And Jerry,
Angotti tentatively has decided that the peace talks will lead the program.
I guess we're okay.
He discusses this with John Chancellor and David Brinkley.
Hi, Joe.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Good.
What do you want to do?
We've got two choices for a lead. We've got Camp David. All the indications are that it's going to wrap up tomorrow.
Right.
I don't think we're going to have any hard information today, but I think it's close enough that it certainly would work as a lead and probably ought to be the lead. But we've also got the Pinto story, the indictments.
Yeah, well, that's a good one, too.
I could go either way. I think I'm kind of leading toward Camp David now, though.
I think I would agree. The fact it's been running on now for over a week, it's about to end. There's a lot of interest in it. The other story is good. You could lead the second segment with it if you wanted to.
Okay, let's do that. We really have a full show. Brian Ross has done another terrific first part of a series on Hell's Angels, which is really just first rate.
it looks like we have two choices for a lead, Camp David or Pinto.
Which we could say, it looks as though it's going to be over tomorrow?
I think so.
Okay. Did he say that?
No, he didn't say that, but I think by the time that information gets around, we'll have to check with Judy and see if she's comfortable with it. Assemble your forces, Washington, and let's begin.
3 p.m. The rundown meeting in Joe Angotti's office. There is give and take among producers, anchormen, and bureau chiefs about what should be in the program. How much time for each story? What approach should be used? Finally, they've generally agreed on the stories to be used, and Joe Angotti determines the final rundown.
Okay, ready? All right, J.C. Camp David, an intro for 15. Washington Woodruff, Camp David, a minute 15. And a JC tag of some kind, a Camp David tag, and John you can decide what that ought to be later.
How long?
15.
After Angotti finishes, the question now,
DB,
is there
civil
enough
service
time?
vote.
Production assistant Bambi Tascarella gives him the answer.
How are we, Bambi?
Minute 40 over.
Minute 40 over.
I never did that to a crowd before.
Wow. Well, why don't you take out all the Brinkley stuff?
Let's take Brown down now, eliminate Rowan, and just make it a sound bite for 45. And we'll have to expand the intro to that, so let's make it 20. Let's take Jensen out, put that on a standby basis. How much do we have now, Bambi?
Okay, with Jensen and the intro out?
No, it's getting hot out. Yeah.
30 seconds of 10.
In Washington, David Brinkley returns to his office and begins writing the stories he will read on the program. In New York, John Chancellor starts to work on the stories he will read. Both John and David write virtually all the material they report on the air. All the parts start coming together.
Here we go.
But at 5 o'clock, trouble develops with the satellite feed from Managua.
Specs is too high.
There is chaos on Managua Airport. People are desperate.
Ira, that's not going to work that way either.
They will go anywhere. Fear made the Civil War here very real.
They wanted to make the effects high at the top, but they were so high they were distorted, Ira.
Why the exodus started.
All that sounds.
The whole thing's distorted, Irie. They don't
I know. Mothers stand on the street corners and cry. They fear they will never see their sons again. Fred Francis, NBC News, Inotepe, Nicaragua.
Good, yeah, I got him.
Harry,
Hello, yes.
talking to Jillian.
Yes, I am.
On the take before this last one, after you get by the opening effects where they were too loud, the mix was better and there wasn't that much distortion in the middle. The last one, the distortion was worse.
It's usable, but we'd like to
You're going to
improve
stay away
it.
from
we will
figures
try.
altogether.
Right. They say that the next to last one was a little better.
He'll begin to start by saying,
Try one more time.
So that's going to run, Harry, 142 minus the 8 of pad, right? Okay, 134.
good spot.
Producer Al Robbins coordinates the domestic feeds into New York.
Ask them if
Bill Wheatley takes care of the Washington feeds.
Jensen ready?
No trouble there. But at 5:45, a time problem develops.
we could eliminate your tag and David's tag. We'll have enough, I think, to squeeze in another spot.
Okay. It'd be neat if we could have just one quick line, but
Well, go ahead and do it. And maybe other things will loosen up. Do the item, and we'll have David do it at his item, and if we need to, if it looks like we're in the area, we can get another spot and we'll just drop it.
well, all right. Actually, it would work without the tag. Let's do it without the tag. Because Brinkley begins saying, well, he was up at Camp David, and it's a transitional sentence anyway.
We're going to drop page 4,
Right.
John's tag, and let me see if...
What about the practice routine?
There's a New York copy of the basket.
Okay, we'll make Woodruff 3 through 4, Amy.
Just a minute, let me talk to David. Maybe we'll put David's tag too. Do you have anything to tag to Wallace yet? I will punch it up. That's what I was going to say. I could sure use this time.
Letter H as in Hager.
Okay, fine. Okay, drop page 7.
Okay.
Now, what does that do to us?
145.
145. All right, now we have to decide. We're going to wait to see Hager, and we're going to have to decide whether Jensen goes in or Hager goes in.
Okay, Jensen would come,
Jensen would go where it is. Hager would probably come after the floods where we had it.
6:05 in New York. John Chancellor discusses the last stories to be written.
I thought I'd do Betty Ford's facelift. I got to do the Pope. I thought I might mention Los Angeles schools. I may do Kennedy. Would you get me Norway banning the skateboards?
Scripts are distributed to all editorial and production personnel who need them. 6:15. In New York, Chancellor leaves the office for the studio. In Washington, David Brinkley does the same.
No, I got something else to do.
there you go.
Hi, how are you, Elizabeth? Good evening. The Camp David Summit Conference is approaching the final stages, and it could end tomorrow or Friday. President Carter's schedule has been full. He met with Prime Minister Reagan last night for an hour.
We have 30 seconds to air, 30 seconds.
Director Norman Cook and Associate Director Judy Garfield make final preparations.
6, 5,
Roller,
4,
stand by.
3, 2, 1.
And up on it. Now.
This is NBC Nightly News with David Brinkley in Washington
Coming to the
and John Chancellor in New York.
key, killing.
Good evening. The Camp David Summit Conference is approaching the final stages, and it could end tomorrow or Friday. President Carter's schedule has been full. He met with Prime Minister Reagan last night for an hour and a half. The Secretary of State and other staff members then worked until after midnight.
Don't see any
And
leaders,
just after
Steve.
dawn today, the President was
Okay.
meeting with them again. It's been reported that President Sadat has been on the phone with Jordan's King Hussein, and in general, all the indications are that something's up.
Coming to Washington.
4, 3,
Judy Woodruff reports
2,
from Camp David.
1.
Washington.
Things have been moving at a faster pace today at Camp David than at any day since the summit began, but there are few details available. White House Press Secretary Jody Powell told reporters that the talks are now in the final stages. Powell refused to characterize what they are working on as a final statement, but that could be because Prime Minister Begin has not wanted in the past to commit himself to a so-called statement of principles. We know there has been some agreement, but how much, we don't know. Most reporters expect the final summing up to represent what agreements have been reached, but also to include some artfully crafted statements that cover over disagreements that could not be resolved here. The only thing we know for certain is that American officials expect the conference to be over by tomorrow night or by Friday at the latest. Judy Woodruff, NBC News, near Camp David.
The program runs smoothly. No trouble with the satellite from Nicaragua. There's spectacular footage of the flood in Arkansas. 17 million people will be taken to Chicago, Rome, Miami, Los Angeles, Denver by NBC Nightly News.
From Washington, thank you, and good night. And from New York, until tomorrow, good night for NBC
5,
News.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Unit 10 will have a